What's up, everyone? Miller.
Shredlord.
Nick Rockneck.
Jim and John.
And before we even get started here, I want to just showcase the fact that we have new name logos. This was courtesy of our buddy over at Heavy Art Talk. Lee did an amazing job with these. We also have Rin's logo up here someplace because he couldn't make it for this one. But yeah, I just want to throw a big shout out to him, his channel. It's linked down below. Go check it out. Hit him up for your art needs because he is awesome.
Yeah. He's a beast.
And a fantastic dude as well. And finally, the Meshuggah ranking. Long awaited. People have been chatting about it. It's been some scheduling stuff, but finally we're here. This is my pick. Definitely one of my top 5 bands all time, I think. I listen to these guys a ton. And this ranking was really like splitting hairs on a lot of these. Some of them, I'm going to admit, I just was like throwing fucking numbers at a spot, you know? So, yeah, it was pretty tough, but... you'll be excited about our decisiveness on some of these. But the original roots of this, I guess, from Frederick Thorndal, one of the main staples of this band. He started in '85, where he had a band called Metallion. But really, the Meshuggah thing started with the Yens. In '87, he had a band called Meshuggah, after the Yiddish name for crazy. They recorded a few things and then ultimately broke up. Later, Jens got with Frederick Thorndal and created a band named Kalipish.
Something foreign and odd.
Yeah, foreign.
One of those.
But they later resurrected that Meshuggah name that Jens came up with from the previous band, and Meshuggah was born.
It was crazy.
Yes, definitely crazy. That was like the perfect name for this band, really.
I learned Meshuggah from Mike Myers on Saturday Night Live.
Yes.
When he played the old Jewish lady.
Oh,
that's where I learned the word Meshuggah.
That's funny.
Random side note.
And they brought in Peter Norden on bass and drummer Nicholas Lundgren. And in '89, they released a 3-song EP, self-titled. They only did, I think, 1,000 copies of those things, so it's pretty rare. But obviously now with the internet, you can look it up.
Yeah, you can go on Discogs and pay probably like $1,000 for it.
Yeah, it's crazy stuff nowadays.
I had $1,000 once.
I don't know. If I had $1,000, I'd probably buy that. I'm that big of a fan, I think. If I had disposable income, let's put it that way.
As you see here, Nick hates CDs, obviously. So
They're the worst.
he's not going to buy it.
I love cassettes. That's heavily documented in all our videos.
So you can see from the thousands of cassettes around us. And in 1990, they ended up replacing Nicholas with Thomas Hockey, who remained the drummer pretty much forever until a little bit later, which we'll get into. He had a little injury. But they signed a Nuclear Blast in Germany and recorded their first album, Contradictions Collapse, in 1991. Now, this album I had at 11, really, just because it was their first, and I think everything else just got better, and it's kind of a cheap skate out of it. But I liked this album, obviously. It was kind of like, not totally groundbreaking, because it did have a deep root in thrash, which I really dig. Love the thrash feel to it, especially like Wires of Devastation. I dig how it kind of kept that edge of your seat kind of nervous feeling about the whole thing. And but yeah, I just think they got progressively better over time, which is why I just put it at 11.
I had this at number 7, and I really enjoy this one, but in terms of like listening to Meshuggah, I don't return to this one that often. So going back and listening to this one again after probably a lot of years was kind of a really cool refresher, because this album kind of sits on an island. It is vastly different than anything else in their discography, more rooted in like bands like Atheist, Coroner, Sadist, Voivod. There are giant Voivod fans that really comes down here. And there's a lot of elements in here that I don't really think get repeated that often, like Internal Evidence and Qualms of Reality. Dude, jazz fusion breakdowns, really crazy lead work on here. And this is back when Jens was playing guitar too. He doesn't do that live anymore. He does contribute to some of the songwriting in the later albums, but this was kind of more along the lines like he and Frederick's writing, and I thought it was just really impressive. It's lower on my list just because I kind of got into this band at a later point, and some of those albums kind of stuck with me a little bit more. But yeah, this is an impressive album that is the most un-Meshuggah album out of the batch. And I still dig the hell out of it.
Even though this album sounds nothing like the Meshuggah that I was used to hearing, because I never listened to this album before this discography ranking, I was incredibly and pleasantly surprised. This is my number 3 album. It sounded like an old forgotten thrash album that I forgot to listen to from back in the day. And I thought that was pretty fucking cool. It did have some newer nuances and stuff, but for the most part for me, it was very just deep-rooted in old school thrash, and I fucking loved it. As far as the debut album goes, I thought it was pretty damn good. Even though it has nothing to do with how they're eventually going to sound, for a debut album, and just for that fucking style, for a kid who grew up starting on thrash, I thought it was great. 3.
For a lot of those reasons, I had it at number 2. Nothing like the Meshuggah I know, but everything about prog and thrash and fusion that I love. And admittedly, when I first heard this record years ago, I didn't like it because it sounded nothing like the Meshuggah I knew. But fast forward to years later, when we did this ranking, and I listened to it, I thought, man, this record rules. And maybe it's because when I listened to this, shortly before I listened to it again, I went and saw Atheist. And, that set changed my life. And this record, I just thought was awesome. It's almost like Voivod, but played by Metallica, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. Actually, that makes a lot of sense.
Yen sounds kind of Hetfield-ish on this one.
Most of these songs rule, dude. Internal Evidence, that song just jams. Thrashy bangers like We'll Never See the Day and Greed, those are awesome songs. All the fusion-y solos, too. I mean, I'm a pretty sizable fan of fusion, Xivious, stuff like that, and a lot of that kind of harkened back to that for me. The harmonies and choirs of Devastation are awesome. I don't know, just going back and listening to this record, I was like, yeah, dude, what have I been missing? And it's Contradictions Collapse, so...
Yeah.
2.
Yeah, when I went back and listened to it too, the Abdicating Cecity is a song that I kind of glossed over in the past, but that stuck out. I really dug the shit out of that song.
If you get the later reissues, you get the bonus track Cadaverous Mastication, which is just fun to say, but it's also a necessary bonus track because it's awesome.
Yep.
Well, soon after the release of that, Kidman decided to concentrate on vocals and kind of drop the guitar thing, which is great because he ends up being one of my favorite vocalists ever. And they brought in Martin Hagstrom to replace him on guitars, which is another member that's just stayed since then. Hagstrom actually previously played with Hockey. They played in a band in 6th grade together, so that's where the hookup came, and he's like, hey, we can bring in this dude.
Deep
and
roots.
Now they recorded the iconic EP None in 94 with Jens Skidman on vocals, Fredrik Thordendal on guitar, Martin Hagstrom on guitar, Peter Norden, of course, coming back on bass, and Thomas Hockey on drums. This EP I ranked at 5, and I think I ranked that because that was the first song I heard from them was Sickening. And it was at Ozfest. They opened with it, and it blew me away. I was immediate fan of the band. And I was anxiously awaiting the album when I found out a couple days later that they had one coming out. But we'll get to that point. But yeah, Sickening and Immutable are for me, a 1-2 punch that is unmatched in not a lot of albums, I guess I would say. Because there are a lot of albums that have a great 1-2 punch. But for me, the EP of None, those first 2 songs are just right out the gate bangers, and immediately got hooked to them. Ritual was a little weird, but Ritual was a little weird, but it totally makes up for it when Gods of Rapture comes in, because that is another song that just fucking rips. So overall, it's 5. It's middle of the road, and I think it's more toward that middle or upper because of the nostalgia of how I saw Sickening for the first time.
I had this at number 9, and I mean, Sickening was kind of my big reason for really getting into this. That whole isolated guitar intro, you hear that chug come in, big old nasty groove. And this album or this EP is just a weird transition, and it makes more sense with an album that comes up later versus the album that comes up next. And just because of its position and what the next album sounds like, it feels like an odd shift. But in terms of a band, like a thrash band going to groove metal, believe me, we've gone over that countless times because, well, the 90s hit thrash pretty hard, and you had to slow down if you wanted to be kind of relevant. I mean, unless you were Pantera, then you were kind of just instantly relevant when you did that. But yeah, the songs became more about the riffs, just the syncopation, the groove, kind of stripped down all the technical flair from Contradictions Collapse. And while I like them, they are kind of just blunt force trauma songs. They're just super heavy. I mean, maybe Aztec Two-Step is just I don't know. It's a little weird, like the more industrial vibe.
It's strange.
I like Aztec two-step.
I don't know.
like
I like the remixes of it a little bit more, but it's just a
I'll give you
weird
that.
song.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just became, I don't know, maybe too oversimplified from where they were. And while it was fun, this one just kind of fell. And again, they kind of built on this formula a little bit later. But here it was, it's still kind of raw.
Yeah, for me, this was number 10. But to be fair, I didn't hear the assignment 100% properly. So this and the other EP, I had to briefly gaze upon and then decide where to briefly put them. But to me, this was kind of all over the place and such a night and day difference from before. It just really wasn't my cup of tea. But once again, I briefly scoped through it. However, number 10 for me.
And I had it dead last at 11, and it's mainly, again, because of that shift coming out of Contradictions Collapse, and then None being, again, such a stark contrast. And it sounded to me still like they didn't entirely know what they were doing, but they were experimenting nonetheless. They're like, all right, let's try something different. And while it landed kind of, it also kind of didn't land. Now, I guess what I will say about this is this the beginning of djent? Like, is this like where it all started? Because there are obviously things that they experimented with in here that, again, as far as groove metal was concerned, didn't necessarily fit the narrative of what groove metal was becoming, because they were experimenting with things like polyrhythms and whatnot. And while there is some cool stuff in here, I just don't think it was time yet for it to happen. And that's why it was number 11 for me.
All right, and after this release, we get into a batch of work-related accidents, unfortunately, with the band. Thorndahl, who was working as a carpenter, severed the tip of one of his fingers, I think his middle finger, and then
Very Ione move.
had injured his hands with a router accident of some sort.
A router?
Yeah, it was a router accident. Yep. So they were unable to perform for months until they got healed up and ready to go. Then they went right into the studio to record an EP titled Self Cage, which was released in '95. And later that same year, February, they would record the album Destroy, Erase, Improve, which came out in '95. Lineup remains the same as it does for a lot of this, minus some of the little accidents and injuries we have here and there. Destroy, Erase, Improve for me was number 8, even though it really kind of like set like, this is fucking Meshuggah, right? This is what we are, this is what's going on, because it doesn't sound like anything else and we don't care. And they come out and make a statement, but it's more for me, they just kept getting better in my eyes as they kept refining everything that really started with this album. It should be higher for me, but like I said, I just like the other albums. I've listened to those more, so I take that into consideration too. But Future Breed Machine, obviously a classic. Soulburn was an instant hit. It really established like that incessant groove that they have, even though they're so off time sometimes. It established that hard groove, and then the fact that Jens is able to take his vocal lines and kind of like, you know, his vocal lines cross over the riff change, and it does so in a way that totally makes sense. It's like everybody's off time, but in every other measure, every third, it kind of comes together and it hits you really hard. And that's what makes this band really unique and special, is that they're able to take these different times and things going on and then wrap this theme around it, and it all makes sense. Even though you're all, you know, you're headbanging like this all the time, you know.
Watching people headbang to Meshuggah, I mean,
is always entertaining.
yeah.
Always.
You can pick the ones that, like, I've never listened to this band before. It's like, you didn't need to tell me, I can tell.
Right?
Yeah, and then but Vanished is a little chaotic, and Acrid Placidity kind of got lost in that, and then Inside What's Within wasn't strong enough after those to like kind of make up for that for me, so maybe that why it fell a little bit. But yeah, number 8.
I had this at number 6. To me, Meshuggah was here, and this is what it was going to be. This was the first step in the Meshuggah sound, and the first half of this album I think is very interesting for me to listen to. I really enjoyed the first half of this album. The second half felt a little repetitive to me, and I think that's why I put it kind of in the middle. But I will say one of the things that Miller was talking about before is when he's talking about stacking those time signatures and those rhythms and stuff, that's polyrhythms, and Soulburn is basically like a masterclass in polyrhythms. Polyrhythms, when you have more than one rhythm stacked on top of each other, but they do it so perfectly, even though it sounds out of place, it absolutely is not. It is perfectly in time. Guys like Frank Zappa started that back in the 70s. But yeah, this is the blueprint to what Meshuggah finally is going to be, and I just think they eventually put out better albums as they refine the sound and experiment within their own new made genre, what works, what doesn't work. So, number 6.
So I had this at number 3. First off, for me, a lot of songs that are very noticeable about Meshuggah come from this record. Future Breed Machine is an absolute banger. It probably always will be. At this time in the game, they're finding their stride, and they're already setting the precedence of this is why you can't fuck with Meshuggah. Because so many bands have tried to emulate this band over the years, but they just keep writing crushers. And at this point, they've found their stride, they found what they're going to be, and they presented it nicely. They're falling into a better songwriting dynamic. They're finding their groove, albeit polyrhythmically. They're finding their groove.
They're finding all the grooves.
Yeah, they're finding all the grooves. Yeah. This is the first record, of course, that I really had to start paying attention to patterns, because there are some very unique, very odd patterns. But as Shred explained, even though they sound wacky, they are 100% definitely in time. Soulburn, again, a rad song. Vanished is a banger. That song is out to hurt you. And Off Time Madness. If you really want to talk about Off Time Madness, I think it really appears in Inside What's Within Behind. There is a bunch of crazy shit happening in that song, and it is a treat to listen to. The drum work on this record, too.
Oh.
I can't fuck with the drum work on this record. Yeah, this is where it started to come together for me, and I was like, yeah, this is a banger of an album, so number 3 for me.
Number 1, this album is the GOAT of Meshuggah albums, in my opinion. And this and, well, the next one, I bought them both as a pair in terms of like my first purchases for Meshuggah. And initially, I hated them because I didn't get it. Because I was like, dude, none of this makes sense. Like, I feel like I'm listening to like 8 different metal bands at the same time. But I kept coming back to it because it was a challenging listen, and I wanted to figure it out. And this one just really grabbed me, especially, you know, listening to all their stuff. Like, this one has all the riff complexity of Contradictions Collapse, but it also has the groove of None. And they found this perfect way to blend it together, and literally nothing sounded like this in 1995. This was their own thing. The polyrhythmic riffs, the quick staccato, like stuttering riffs, and the weird jazzy solos, like all this came together so brilliantly. Like, this is, I guess, maybe the birth of math metal, because this is like a fucking mathematical equation that I still don't quite get. Like, I had to learn what a polyrhythm was because of this album. I was like, what the hell are they even doing? But it's flat out brilliant. Like, Soulburn, I mean, Future Breed Machine, if you're lucky, you'll still hear that live. That's been their encore, at least like the last couple of times I've seen them. Beneath is amazing. And if you just want like a good groove to settle in, Suffer in Truth. That one just kind of sticks to one, like, all right, I can kind of, they're not really fucking with me too much, at least in this part of the song. But yeah, this album is absolutely brilliant. And I mean, it kind of set the standard for a lot of bands to come. Kind of changed around like Tech Death a bit too. Like, Tech Death really, I think, took a lot from this too. And then, well, I mean, we'll get into the fact that there are a ton of Djent clones after this one, but I think maybe that happens a little bit further down the line. But yeah, this was the starting block. This was the big coming out party. They were done sounding like anyone else. They were just going to sound like Meshuggah.
And after recording, the band went on a European tour with Machine Head, where Peter Norden, the bass player, became ill with a balance disorder. It threw him off in his equilibrium. He decided to go back to Sweden, and Adam Deuce, actually, from Machine Head, offered to fill in on bass, but the band ultimately decided, just 4 of us, we'll just do it as a 4-piece. It was kind of what I saw or what I read was kind of a split. Sometimes they would have Thorndahl on bass, and then other times Hagstrom would tune his guitar down with an octave pedal, a pitch shifter to come down, so they would fill it out that way. But they remained that 4-piece for a while. And in mid-95, Norden would ultimately leave just kind of permanently and be replaced with Gustav Helm for the remainder of the tour. 96 and 97, we'll see a couple of tours, hometown shows, nothing too crazy. Thorndahl Worked on his solo project, which you brought up when we were kind of like collaborating at the beginning of this.
Oh, it's
I have that
bonkers.
album.
Same here.
Yep.
And 97, they released the EP, True Human Design, which is fantastic. Heilm officially joined in January of 98, and in May, they started recording the next album released later that year, Chaosphere, which was in 98. Gustav Heim was the only one coming in. Like I said before, it was a 4-piece, so we added Gustav on bass. And for me, Chaosphere was number 7. I really love this album, but I really love a lot of their albums. This was a little higher when I first wrote, but I was scribbling around. I had to fit one in because I forgot about it. And so it kind of fell a little bit. New Millennium, Cyanide Christ, and Neurotica are two of my favorites, like, I think, period, Meshuggah songs. They're fantastic. The Mouth Licking What You Bled, always loved the overly frantic, kind of spazzy feeling and still maintaining the groove overall, which is the what this band is great at doing, that creating this frantic, chaotic mess, but they always have that backbone groove or that backbone idea that to anchor everything in, where the casual listener that isn't like a music nut like Shred can still attach themselves to this and like, okay, it's anchored in some way. Overall, I think it had kind of the same pace-ish, which kind of brought it down, but fell a little bit just because I like the other ones better.
I had this at number 5. Truth be told, this was the first Meshuggah album I'd ever heard. One of my friends showed me this album, said, check out Meshuggah, and I said, what the hell is this? Much like Nick, who earlier on was confused massively by Meshuggah, I was also confused by Meshuggah. I said, this doesn't make any sense. I feel dumb while listening to this. And then throughout the years, I would jam Meshuggah, and one of the reasons I listened to Meshuggah was always because it was a challenge, and I wanted to uncover that. So yeah, this was the first record I ever heard. A definite push into their heavier sound, and a definite push now into polyrhythm. Yeah, New Millennium Cyanide Christ is a banger to this day. I will jam that song anytime, any place. Neurotica, one of the first grooves, at least, that I kind of figured out on drums, that tribal groove in the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
I jammed that over and over and over again. I was like, I'm going to figure this out because I'm not stupid, which is debatable.
We're not here to argue.
The Mouth Licking What You Bled is a banger. Sane is insanely groovy. One of the songs that always pissed me off about this album, though, was Elastic. Heavy, groovy, and such a good build for it to go into 11 minutes of nothingness. Like, I don't get it.
It was the 90s, dude. There was always that, like, weird hidden track thing. Like, oh, we're going to come back with something that you'll probably skip years from now.
Yep. You cannot help but bang your head to this record. No matter how hard you try, you're going to groove with this album because it hits pretty hard. Wacky leads, melodies are used more transitionally now. More intricate vocal cadences, so that was cool. I've always enjoyed this record, but it is number 5 for me because there are other albums I enjoy more.
This one's number 3 for me, and I got this at the same time as Destroy, Erase, Improve. And honestly, this was the one that I probably got into quicker because Destroy, Erase, Improve was, I would say, like, way more complex on a lot of different levels. Like, the riff work was really just wild, and it wasn't just the syncopation. It was just how, like, strange it was. But this one, they kind of brought it back to the whole Nun vibe, where, like, all right, let's get down on these heavy chugs, the syncopation, the groove, and kind of stick with that and build around that, but do it way more cleverly.
Yeah.
And that's what made it stand out. And New Millennium, Cyanide Christ, and Corridor Chameleons were the first 2 tracks, like, all right, it's clicking. This is making sense. And I don't know, this album is just sort of fun for that sake. Like, it's very technical, and it's still very strange, but at the same time, you can kind of, like, find the groove a little bit easier. The more down-tuned, heavy guitars, I instantly latched on that because I'm a big Fear Factory fan, and it definitely reminded me a lot of Demanufacture. And I really like Yen's vocal phrasing on here. Mm-hmm. Like, dude, the end of Corridor Chameleons, dude, as people much, much younger than I would say, he's spitting some bars. Like, it's this rapid fire thing that's on top of these just really intense staccato riffs. And yeah, across the board, like, this album is just kind of strange and dark, and I don't know, it's just fun as hell. Like, the exquisite machinery of torture, that crazy robotic ramble that's going on there is like, adds this kind of unsettling atmosphere to the album. But yeah, this album, I dig it. Like, it's a groove machine. It does kind of strip away some of the more technical elements that I love about Destroy, Erase, Improve. But this, again, I think it's kind of like ushering in yet another new era for the band here. And yeah, this is just a fantastic listen.
This is my number one album. I think this album took everything that I liked about Destroy, Erase, Improve and took out all the boring shit and decided to improve upon it. One thing that I love about this too is the production on Meshuggah is usually pretty good for the most part. Yeah. But there was something about this album too as I was crossing it that the production on this album really able to showcase everybody and what a fucking killer musician everybody is. Really, like, I thought the production really lended itself well to showcase how crazy of a songwriters they can be with the clarity. And the leads. I haven't got to really talk too much about the leads. The leads are really good and always appropriate for, you know, the sections. A lot of weird chromaticism stuff, but that's kind of fits into the vibe, right? That mechanical kind of...
He always called them like anti-solos.
Yeah.
Like, that's what he said in interviews. Like, you know what? That makes sense.
Yeah, but it's always perfect, you know? Like, to me, there's nothing worse than taking sections of really cool songs and then playing some like old blues solo on top of it. You know what I mean? Really something that just doesn't fit. Like, this is very cool. It's a way to incorporate some lead melodies and things, but in a way that lends itself really well to the section it is going to. It's not just, here's your 8 bars, you know, so.
And it's not some like rehashed thing. It's not like the chorus.
Yeah. Right.
It's its own thing. And then, like you were saying, they let that breathe, that background, that rhythm part breathe out so you can, you know, most of those rhythms are fucking awesome. As most of their riffs are. But a lot of the solo break stuff, like the riff underneath, is just killer.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Always killer stuff from them as far as the leads go too, but they're just perfect for the part. And when my boy Per Nilsson was in the band for a quick second, all you motherfuckers who got to see Per Nilsson live, you're all very lucky. Even if you don't like Scar Symmetry, you have to know that Per Nilsson is one of the baddest motherfuckers to ever touch the strings.
He is.
And shortly after Chaosphere released, they went on a short U.S. tour. After that, returned to the U.S. with Slayer again, and then started beginning the stage of the album, the next album, in about 2000. But in July of 2001, Gustav Holm officially departed from the band, and they just kind of did what they did before and just stuck to the 4-piece thing. And around this time is when I first got introduced, because they were at Ozfest. That it was a last-minute thing that they did, and they weren't sure if they were going to do it. They, you know, you mentioned they were waiting for their new guitars and all this other stuff, and they decided to do it anyway. And when I saw them, they blew me away, obviously. In August of 2002, Nothing was released with no bass player on this album. So the only album not to feature a bass player until they eventually re-recorded it later and added their 8-string guitars and a bass player, and I prefer to listen to it that way. But when I did this, I went back to the original, which I still love. It got me hooked on Meshuggah, so it is number 2 for me. Probably more for that reason, because it was the first album that I was like, okay, I've heard this band, they're fucking killer, they're immediately one of my favorite bands, and oh my god, they have an album coming out like in a couple months. And so I was super stoked about it. It's the first album I had on day one, got the CD, and absolutely loved it. The opening of the album is just that low guitar, which really comes out when they re-recorded it, but still, like that guitar, and you're like, okay, what's going on? And then that groove hits, and at that point, I think they in Nothing, they kind of evolved from that, all that happened before, and really refined what they were doing in my eyes. It was the one that stood out amongst the earlier ones as like a big kind of announcement, aside from Destroy and Erase Improve, which was like a real statement piece for them. And then after the opening, they keep it going with Rational Gaze. It's one of the best 1-2 punches. I've said it before, but they got a lot of these albums, they come out right the gate with the first 2 songs swinging, and they really hit you with that left-right combo right off the bat and throw you off guard for the rest of the album. Always loved Thralls Pulled at Random, and even though it's really one of the more out there ones on the album in terms of timing and their polyrhythms and the things they're doing, it just grabs me as a song. I love it. Spasm didn't hit all the way through for me, so that's, you know, one of nitpicky things if I had to pick about this album, but it's number 2 for me. I listen to this still to this day.
This for me was number 7. And that's a strange thing to say because for a lot of years, this was really, really high on my list. But something I noticed as we had to listen to all these records is while there are a lot of bangers on this record, and I'll talk about that for sure, I found this record became kind of one-dimensional. Like, it's just a bunch of heavy chugs, which is great, which is normally what I love. But it seemed kind of basic for Meshuggah in the direction that they were taking. Like, they came out with Chaosphere, and that record was wacky and nutty, and then this one seemed like it was a little bit more stripped back and just about groove, and it kind of lost me. And that is really weird because, like I said, I love this record for a lot of years. Stenga is a great song, a great way to open. Much like Miller said, a great 1-2 punch. Closed Eye Visuals has always been a great catchy song that will remain in my head forever, I'm pretty sure. We just scatted the first verse at least while we were talking about this. Spasm, I love how dark that song is. And then, of course, Nebulous is just a slow, brooding banger. I love that song. I think this is the album that so many djent bands over the years have kind of sucked off. Dude, just everybody just kind of played on this record and thought, like, okay, this sounds really cool. Yeah, those are some wacky rhythms. Yep, we can do this. We can be heavy. This is where I think a lot of modern day bands today have derived their sound from. I think it came from nothing.
Periphery, we're looking at you. At least they didn't call him a Meshuggah core. Thank God.
Yeah, no kidding. I do really like this record, but it just kind of fell for me as we got more and more through the listening process. So, number 7.
This is number 9 for me. One of the first notes I put is this album feels like the birth of modern djent. These bands suckle at the teat of this album for sure. Certain parts were too repetitive for me. It was kind of such a contrast to what came before. It's like Noonan said, they kind of focused all on groove and cut back a little bit as far as some of the heavier stuff. Just wasn't one of my favorites overall. And for that reason, number 9.
I had it at number 4, and I'm going to specifically say that I don't really like the original mix that much. I mean, it was kind of rushed because, like, oh, we got to get to Ozfest. Let's get this together. And they didn't have time to get their very
2 days.
Yeah,
I think.
very special guitars are kind of like the thing for this album, too, because once they got those 8-string guitars, you have the 2006 version of this, which is honestly the way to listen to it. Like, that's the way they intended it. And stylistically, all right, I would say that this is the birth of kind of the current era of Meshuggah. Like, this is where everything kind of starts in terms of, like, everything that follows this sounds very similar. And it's mainly because of the tone. And I'll say that they kind of just ride the power of that tone. Like, the riffs, while the time signatures are, still complex, still wild, and the drum patterns, of course, are still bonkers, it becomes more about droning on that tone, just wailing on that top string and kind of just making it as heavy as possible, but still complex. I still think the songs are interesting, though. Like, Rational Gaze is a standout. Spasm, I like that song, the weird whispered vocals in there.
Yeah.
Jens really does those vocals live because generally he says, like, yeah, no one can really hear them because, again, I don't know if you know this, our guitar tone's really heavy. Close Eye Visuals is one of my favorite tracks with them. That stupid lurching bend in that riff is just gross. And Nebulous, when you listen to it on the 2006 version, they slow it down, and it's already slow and menacing and dark, and it's just better on this version. While I really do like this album, I do miss some of the thrashier influences. Like, again, like, even down to the riffs, it's not so much about, like, a clever riff or, like, like a big hook that repeats. It's more about, like, individual notes almost. And, that's cool. It becomes, like, kind of part of their sound, but I think they do it a little bit more cleverly later on, too. But, yeah, I still really enjoy this album. It's mostly for the tone, the vibe. Like, this is dark and oppressive and menacing. And in terms of, like, just a slower, more brooding album in their discography, this one just kind of has, like, a feeling to it that is just, I don't know, bleak and, I don't know, kind of strange. And, yeah, I dig it.
During this time, they kind of, like, were the 4-piece going, doing the 8-string guitar thing. They did eventually bring in a bass player, Dick Lovegren, in February of 2004, and that's when the EP I was recorded and released, which featured basically just one continuous 21-minute, 22-minute long track. And this was lowered because I kind of like forgot to put it in the mix, so it just became 10 for a number. I've only ever listened to it from front to back, which is the way you should do it, so that it's maybe why I've always thought of it as more of a song than an album or an EP, so that's why I didn't have it in my thought. But that being said, I mean, the next album, Catch 33, is kind of the same way too. I don't know why I is just always sunken in the background for me in this band, and I listen to it, and I love it. It's just 10 is a number, and it drones a little bit. There's some sections that I really enjoy, but it's one of those things where it's hard to like. All right, I like this section here between 10 minutes and 13 or whatever it may be. You don't want to do the band a disservice in like just going to that section of the song, so maybe that's why it gets washed over, because I don't have 21 minutes sometimes to listen to something, and it's just kind of a disservice to not do it any other way than that, to me.
I have this at number 6. This EP is awesome. It's honestly one of my favorite 21-minute songs ever. Or, songs that actually climb over 20 minutes. This actually has a kind of a cool connection to our home state, Ohio. Jens actually did a guest spot on, believe it or not, Mushroomhead's album 13, I think it is. I don't know. It was the one with the, I don't know, I had done Mushroomhead art on it, whatever. He did a guest spot on it. Actually, one of the better tracks in there. I really dug his vocal appearance on there. And he formed, I guess, like a friendship with Jason Popson, or J-Man from Mushroomhead, and they invited him to come back to Cleveland and record, an EP on Fractured Transmitter Records. And they ended up doing this thing here in the States, which I thought was kind of cool. But yeah, musically, this song is bonkers. Mm-hmm. And I love it. Like every transition, I don't know, it feels like it just gets heavier and wilder. Mm-hmm. The faster moments are back. Like this song would not fit in the scheme of nothing at all. Like, there are blast beat sections, fast thrashy gallops. The syncopated, like heavy thrash gallops in there are awesome. The breakdown that comes in at the 8 minute and 41 second, I got that from him. He has it all timed out because I didn't write that much. But yeah, it's just absolutely crushing. And I don't know, I just like this song because it's kind of like an all-encompassing song. Like it's everything that they've done up to this point in their career. And maybe something that alludes to what they're going to do in the future, too. Yeah, this is a fantastic EP. I mean, yeah, it's one 21-minute song, but it's pretty damn awesome, like, across the board. So, yeah, I mean, if you've never checked out the I one, because it kind of does like, slide on the radar a little bit. It's just sort of a weird one-off. But, yeah, check it out. It's awesome.
For me, this was number 7. This was the other EP that we included that I learned about last minute. So... in super quickly judging this, I like that one song out of the 4 tracks more than I like a couple albums. So, to be fair, it is a 20-something minute song. So, it's like almost half of an album's worth of material, basically, is the way I kind of look at it. But yeah, I enjoyed it for some of the same reasons that Nick was talking about. It was just heavier, and it was just like... it's almost, if you think about it like a story, right? It just kind of, the story hierarchy. But instead of going down, it just kept going up and up and up and up the mountain. Riffy, fantastic. Yeah, number 7. Right at the end for me.
So for all the reasons listed above, I had this at number 4. This 21-minute song is a fucking insane, heavy bastard that just keeps growing and growing, and every part in it is awesome. Every time they transition, it transitions into something heavier. I actually wrote down all the times because everything that came next I really enjoyed. 2 minutes, gut punch, fast, chuggy, rhythmic bastard. At 3:40, double kick syncopation with death metal grooves. 5:40 is just sheer insanity. And 8 minutes and 41 seconds, the breakdown that Nick was talking about. I love it to death.
21 minutes, he came.
Yep. 13:19, fast ascending bendies. I mean, just and the last thing that they go out on from 17 minutes on is just plain nasty, and I like it. I think it's just a kind of a compilation of everything that Meshuggah is, just wrapped up into one crazy riffy song, and I absolutely adore it.
And just a short year later, in 2005, they would release the next album, Catch 33, which got them a Grammy nod in Germany. Their first Grammy nod, albeit in a different country. They wouldn't get an American one until later. Catch 33, I have at 9. It's pretty low on the list. Overall, for me, I guess it was kind of like it felt a step back a little bit. And this is still like one continuous song with like little movements in it, much like a classical piece. You know, you'd have a hour-long thing that would have different movements to it. And, I mean, the part labeled Shed stands out to me, but like I said, everything kind of felt like a little bit of a step back, and it wasn't like going forward for me. So why it came at number 9.
Yeah, I had this record at number 10. First and foremost, there is so much unnecessary, open, empty space on this record. Why? From Autonomy Lost all the way to Entrapment, the grooves are cool. The groove on the Paradoxal Spiral is kind of neat. And then it just kind of drops off. Shed is cool. That song's cool. I think everyone that listens to Meshuggah can agree that Shed is cool. But really, like, I just don't get why there's so much empty space. Like, why? And the first 6 tracks mostly feel like B-sides from nothing. So it's kind of like they didn't really try a whole lot. Persona non grata is cool, the groove is cool, but why is it only 1 minute and 47 seconds? Like, you've got all this empty space, and then you find a really cool groove, and then you cut it off. When I first heard this album, and I thought the first couple grooves were cool, and then it just dropped off into space, I was just like, yeah, pass. So that's kind of where I am. Number 10, yeah.
It's dead last for me. I think the concept is cool, but I wasn't crazy with how they executed it. Not every part of the sequence, if you will, felt like a transition. To me, this album sometimes just felt like random things thrown together.
Straws pulled at random.
Straws pulled at random. This, honestly, for me, could be broken down into about 15 minutes worth of listenable music.
Yep.
They went for something, and I didn't quite get it. So, number 11 for me.
Dead last for me, too. Man, I have more questions listening to this again. Like, all right, they did the whole eye thing, like, hey, let's do one long track and, you know, make it as awesome as possible. I feel like they were maybe still stuck on that, but they stretched it out to a full length, and instead of just calling it Catch 33, like one long song with like different movements labeled out, they're just like, no, each track's going to have its own name, and it's pointless because you won't even know when the track break hits. Because I remember the first time I listened to this, I was like, yeah, dude, this longer song is pretty killer. Like, why does it say I'm on track 4? What the fuck? And yeah, like, this album is just confusing. I don't get why they needed a drum machine on this, because you have an awesome drummer. There's not stuff on here that I would say is too complex for him, because, again, we've heard what this guy can do. I don't even think the band necessarily likes this album very much, because I don't think I've ever heard them play any track off of this live. And that includes Shed, which is the only song in here that stands as an individual track, as in there's a track break before it and after it that make it one song. That shit doesn't exist on the rest of the album. This is just a long, weird experiment that, I don't know, like, it just doesn't work. I mean, yeah, of course they're playing like impressive music and there's cool rhythms. You can get all of that on any other Meshuggah album. This one is just, I don't know, like, I don't get it. Like, I think they got lost in the concept and then forgot to make a functioning album out of it. So yeah, dead last for me. This is probably the only one that I will like just flat out dog, because I rarely ever come back to it, because again, there's not any standout tracks. And if you're going to do something with like movements and shit, let people know when the movements start and stop. It's, I don't know. I'm done ranting.
Usually I know when my movements stop.
Yeah,
It's usually when I start wiping. But,
Yeah.
But then sometimes you wipe, the movement continues. It's like you stimulate a little something.
Oh, I thought it was
inside
just
you.
because you ate too much cheese.
No, I just thought I tickled my prostate.
How deep are you wiping?
Well, you're supposed to get in there, right?
Gotta get clean. Gotta get clean. Yeah, I'm wondering, going back to Meshuggah Type Back, I'm wondering if, because at that time, Tomas had did a thing with Drums from Hell, or there was some sort of programming thing.
That was the program.
Yeah, so he had his drums basically impulse response into a software. So, and at that time, in some of the interviews I've seen, I know at that time they lived in separate areas of Europe, so a lot of the things was like, okay, Frendek would throw something to Jens, and okay, I'm going to add to it now, we're sending it to the next guy, and then they would do this. So maybe he was just, I got my drums digitally. Why
and IR doesn't sound impressive anymore, but back in 2005, that was high tech.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Devin Townsend used it on
shit.
Ziltoid. And, you know, up to this point, like, Meshuggah's style of writing, at least, was a lot of file sharing. Because, again, they live separately. And, like, hey, I'm working on this bass line or this drum groove. Like, what can you build on top of that? You know, it took a while to actually going to get to a point again where they were, like, all jamming together. Mm-hmm. So, I get it. That works. But I think this was just, like, way too experimental. And, like, you made an album that doesn't make any sense.
You guys had mentioned it. See, or Jim and John had mentioned it just seems like a lot of leftover ideas, and that could have been what it was.
They make up for it, though.
They do.
Yes, they do.
All right, Meshuggah would then return to the studio in March of 2007 to start recording ObZen, which would release 1 year later in March of 2008 and would feature Dick Lovegren on bass. Finally cementing, I should say, the lineup that is now current. And ObZen is my number one. I love this album. Bleed. Everyone
knows it.
And it was like kind of like getting to the point of like viral videos being a thing. And when they recorded the video for this, which featured pretty much Tomas and his amazing drum work on this, it like catapulted this band into the stratosphere. Because at that point, like other drummers, other notable musicians, respected musicians, were commenting on it. You know, in an interview with like Lars from Metallica, he was saying, "Hey, this drumming in this is fantastic." Raymond Herrera, you brought up Fear Factory, and he had mentioned too, like, you know, damn, this is. You got to watch. This is a fucking clinic on drums, and it's. I know it's for Tomas. It's like that song is really hard to play. Obviously, those triplet, quadruple things over and over and over at a blistering speed. I mean, everyone knows the song. ObZen is just stacked with killer song after killer song after killer song. And it's been my number one ever since I first listened to it the day it came out.
It's also my number one. It has been since it came out, to be honest. This record, much like Miller was saying, is just simply stacked with awesome music. Of course, Bleed. I have been listening to Bleed for... 16 years now, and I still for the life of me can't figure out the drum beat, and I've watched instructional videos, and I, for whatever reason, can't play the fucker. And I've seen a lot of drummers on YouTube over the years struggle to learn this, and it's nuts. Dude, Dancers to a Discordant System, the breakdown in that song, that entire song just rules. Pravis is amazing. Combustion, what a way to start an album.
Yeah, sure.
Lethargica, pretty much at any given time, at any point in my life, a random track from this record could come on, and it'll be one of the only tracks that'll come on at random that I won't skip. I won't be like, man, I don't want to listen to this today. Like, the overall song structure here, like, they've just taken everything that they've done and just kind of, like, cemented it perfectly. Like, the melodies in here are great. Everything sounds dark. It sounds well thought out, well put together. It's just an amazing record, and like I said, ObZen will always be my number one Meshuggah album.
For me, this was number 2. With this and Chaosphere, you can kind of 1A, 1B it for me. This is like kind of like the epitome of Meshuggah for me. And what I mean by that is, like, they've been around, they've been established, they know what they like, they know what they don't like. I really feel like this album, they did a really good job of exploring the limits of their own style that they created. They left no stone unturned in their chaotic math metal madness, but they also blended it with some good melodies here and there when needed to be. It was just a good blend overall. And yeah, like I said, Chaosphere in this. Bleed was the first song I ever heard by Meshuggah. Obviously, that music video. Is that the same one where the dude makes the face? Is that
the one like the weird thread being woven?
No, what video is where he's like...
Oh, that's like every picture of him ever.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's an amazing collection of tunes, and like I said, I think they really pushed themselves to their absolute limit of their style, and I thought it was very well thought out, very creative. Number 2.
Number 2 for me as well. Honestly, I'll say that this is probably their catchiest album. Yeah. Like, in terms of melodies and hooks, they found a way to kind of add like a little bit of variety to their style and incorporate some really solid melodies in there. Like Dancers to a Discordant System, I think it's a flat out catchy song despite having like a lot of like weird atonal riffs and melodies in there. They found a way to make that catchy. And rhythmically, Like, it didn't kind of like lock on to one pattern. You know, it's kind of a common complaint about nothing. And I mean, Catch 33, I have more than one complaint about that. Yeah, there's just more to this one. It's a well-rounded album. The songs stand out from one another. Like, you got some flat-out bruisers, like the title track. Like, that is just Chug City on that one. But you also have, like, you know, songs that are a little bit more atmospheric, like Lethargica. There's just a well-rounded vibe to this album, and the absolutely infectious nature of Bleed. Like, that song mystifies drummers. I want to say it wasn't long after that I saw, like, everyone trying to do, like, a drum cover of that.
Yep.
And just going, I don't get it. My ankles hurt. That and the whole viral nature, like, I remember, was it the Bleederazzi, when they dubbed it to Lady Gaga?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It works. Like, it works arguably much better than it should. But it really works. Like, holy shit, they syncopated that so well. And yeah, this became, like, I mean, honestly, their big hit. And it's weird that I haven't heard them play it live the last 2 times I've seen them, I think.
They pretty much retired the song.
They can't. Dude, that's your Ace of Spades, guys.
Yeah.
It really is. Like, there's tons of other cool songs, but that's, like, kind of like, if I'm going to introduce someone to Meshuggah, that's, like, you know, top 5 songs there I'm going to show them. Like, yeah, just check out this madness. And how they multi-track the guitars on that song, because there's 6-string guitars on there. Like, it isn't all just 8-string guitars. But yeah, this album is sort of a marvel. It doesn't quite outdo Destroy, Erase, Improve for me, but yeah, this is an absolutely fantastic album. And yeah, if I was going to introduce someone to Meshuggah flat out, like, if I had to pick one album, I would probably pick this one, even over Destroy, Erase, Improve, just because I think people can get into this one easier.
Yeah.
And after that album, in January of 2009, they get another Grammy nod. This time the Swedish Grammys would give them a nod for Best Hard Rock Act in the Best Hard Rock category. I don't know. I don't watch the Grammys. I don't know how they work.
There's like a trophy.
I know Jethro Tull won Best Metal. That's all I know.
There you go.
Over Metallica. So that's all you need to know.
A crime against humanity. Sorry.
Another crime, or at least a low point for Meshuggah in April. Tomas Hockey suffered a herniated disc and causing issues with his right foot while he was playing. So the surgery obviously went well. And soon after, they returned to film that concert DVD right up here, Alive, which is fantastic. If you haven't seen it, it's utterly fantastic. One of the best music concert DVDs I think I've ever seen. 2 years later, though, in 2012, they would finally release Koloss, which is my number 4. This was the first one that I had gotten on vinyl, like day one. So I was super stoked about that. And this album kills. A lot of hits for me. I Am Colossus comes in, and then you have that blistering pace of The Demon's Name is Surveillance, which is awesome. It's another 1-2 punch for them. They're very, I guess, consistent with that. They really come out with those 1-2 hits on their albums to get your attention. And then sometimes they keep the momentum going. Other times they kind of drone off a little bit. But this one I don't think drones off too much. Demerge is my favorite song by them. It's proven if a war army infantry unit listens to that fucking song before, they will win.
That breakdown, the end,
it's
though.
just
Dude,
gets you pumped. That song is a heavy hitter. If you're on a football team, any sports team, listen to that in the locker room before you go out there, and you'll just murder everyone on that field.
I have this at number 4 as well. This started out to be an album that I didn't think I would like at first. It kind of gave me the impression that it was just kind of, everything was just kind of be stagnant a little bit. However, when we got to the track Behind the Sun, you start getting some different melodic parts in there, and that really brought me into the album. And then you have different melodic parts in such tracks like Break Those Bones and The Hurt That Finds You. Those were some of the standout moments for me, because as we go along this Meshuggah discography, there's a lot of polyrhythmic riffs. There's so many riffs that, I mean, I don't know about you guys. Sometimes a lot of stuff can just blend, especially when you're in a band, you know, and they have a certain style. So as we were going through this discography, when I would find those certain moments that would kind of grab me and make it memorable, that's how they would kind of attach themselves to me, at least. And because of those reasons, that album really held my attention, and parts of it would get stuck in my head. So for that reason, number 4.
I have this at number 8. This is an album I would describe as, I love individual songs, but the entire album doesn't gel quite as well, and the fact that it follows ObZen That's a tough one to follow. I will say that it is heavier. Like the production on this might be like the beefiest I think they've ever sounded. The drums in particular just are absolutely
huge.
Booming. But again, like there's certain songs like just, they don't gel as well, but the standouts are huge. Like Do Not Look Down. The groove on there, it's almost kind of like a booty shaking groove. Like, dude, I can kind of settle into this. Look, this is nice. That sliding, weird, like just heavy percussive riff on Marrow. And again, the breakdown at the end of Demiurge, that first note that gets hit, that's a nuke. That is a nuke level note, and it just hits like a son of a bitch. Same thing with Swarm, the cool tribal drum patterns and how it changes rhythms a lot on that. It's got great standouts, but again, like, I don't know, it doesn't gel as well as other albums, but I mean, I come back to these songs quite often. And this is like, I believe, the first one in a while that they worked together as a band rather than doing the file sharing thing. So at least on certain songs, it does feel like, this is something that was like kind of jammed out a bit, especially Do Not Look Down. Like, it's like, let's just kind of settle in this groove and kind of just riff it out. But yeah, it's good, but I don't know, like, again, there's just moments on it where it's like, that just feels like stock Meshuggah.
I also had this at number 8. In regards to production, I will say, while it is beefy for sure, I never liked the snare drum. It sounded a little bit like they mic'd the bottom but not the top. I don't know how to really put that into words, but like
I know what you mean.
Just the way he thwacks that snare drum, it almost sounds like the snare's turned off sometimes. Again, I don't know how to describe that. Anyway, we'll get past
odd.
it.
You probably blew that metal snare thing out the first hit. They're like,
yeah.
It's broken. That's the sound. It's the broken.
We're that metal. We broke it immediately.
I mean, Tomas hits those fucking drums.
Yeah, pretty hard. The first time I ever listened to this record, I'll never forget it because it was kind of a unique experience. I got a hold of this record while I was in Providence, Rhode Island, hanging out with some longtime friends, and on the plane ride back from Providence to Detroit, I jammed this record for the first time. This record feels kind of loose, and sometimes some of the songs don't really go anywhere. Like, even the good songs, like, they tend to hang on one main riff, and then they just play that over and over again with some little, like, melodic things behind it. Like, just sometimes I don't feel like it's a complete thought. I feel like more they just ride on a riff and go with it from there. That being said, still, songs like Do Not Look Down are awesome. Behind the Sun has a bunch of great angular melodies in it. While it may be one track as far as the riff is concerned, the angular melodies are kind of neat. Demiurge, of course, that's a great song. It just is, and the breakdown is pretty gnarly. Again, I'll state, too, that it is kind of hard to follow up ObZen. That record was such a banger, but the record as a whole, I just don't think the glue is held together. Like, I think they have a couple of banger songs, and then a song that's kind of meh, and then a couple of banger songs, and then a song that's kind of meh. So, still a great record, but just not my favorite in the lineup. So, number 8.
All right, it takes us to 2013 in February, where they released a 2-track EP entitled Pitch Black, featuring a tune that Thorndahl had written, and then also a live track of Dancers to a Discordant System from the album ObZen. July of 2016 would be the release of Violent Sleep of Reason. I have at number 3. Had to look at my notes because I kind of forgot. Clockworks, obviously, is a staple in that album. I really think the title track stands out a lot to me, Violent Sleep. That middle section where the solo comes in, that riff change like we were talking about before. Yeah. That riff under that solo is fucking killer. It's fucking killer. And the first time you hear it is with the solo, so you're like, oh, wow, you got the solo going, and that's cool, and then you got this badass riff. But then after the solo, they just keep with that riff. Yeah. And they keep fucking going with it, and then he ends is screaming over and stuff, and that whole thing just gets me pumped. I fucking love that song.
Powerful moment.
Yep. The only parts I thought really in this album, Ivory Tower and Stifled, they kind of drag a little bit. It's kind of nitpicky for me. But overall, Violent Sleep of Reason, I think, really hits heavy. The production as well. Like you mentioned the last album, they really beefed up everything at the guitars, the drums, and they kind of keep with that going. And it is kind of like just moving along a little bit. Like the Meshuggah train is just kind of moving along in this album. But there's still a lot of things that hit hard on here and that they usually go back to. So number 3.
I have this at number 5. This album is good, but to me it is kind of just Meshuggah doing Meshuggah. And there's nothing wrong with that, but there's not as many memorable moments that stick out in my mind as opposed to some of the albums I put higher, ObZen, Chaosphere, blah, blah, blah. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with this album. Once again, they have their sound, they get to it, and this is a great album, but nothing particularly just makes me want to go, man, I want to put this on when I'm going to get in the car. So it's kind of middle of the road for me, but nothing wrong.
I also have this at number 5. This is Meshuggah doing Meshuggah. In fact, I remember when they dropped this album, there were a lot of reviewers that pretty much just said, well, kind of what everyone was thinking was like, Meshuggah comes back to show the djent kids how djent is done. Mm-hmm. And I agree. Once again, every time Meshuggah does that, like, yeah, you know, the djent kids are like, well, all right, we got to retool it again. Maybe we should get a squeaky emo singer to ruin it, though.
That sounds great.
That sounds like a great idea.
Perfect.
Let's do that. I think this one, it gels a bit better than Koloss, in my opinion. And I think it's got some excellent standout tracks. Like you brought up the title track. Dude, that has like some rhythm shifts on there that are just bonkers. Like in terms of like, you know, it'd been a while at this point for me, like, oh, I can catch a Meshuggah groove. Like, I got this. I'm a veteran. I've been listening to this band for years. And when that song hit, I was like, wait a minute, hold on. That's kind of a different time signature. But the songwriting, I think, just has a little bit more flash to it. Like, dude, Clockworks in particular, that opening track is fantastic. And how it builds, especially into that just nasty second half where you get that snare roll build up. It's like, oh, dude, that is just absolutely crushing. Nostrum, I love, again, just kind of those standard syncopated chugs from Meshuggah. We actually saw them live on this tour.
Yes, we did.
With High on Fire, next to a pair of chicks that wouldn't shut the fuck up.
Oh my god,
Yeah.
dude. I remember that.
There we
now.
go.
That, oh.
Oh my god, this band's loud. Is this guy gonna wear a shirt?
Dude,
She's all sweaty.
Dude, for the whole show.
She's talking about Matt Pike, wasn't she?
Yep.
The whole show.
The whole show, I kept looking over like, I want a crowd killer to come by right now. I'm so tired of these two. But yeah, like this one, it managed to be more rhythmically complex than Koloss, but I think it was just a bit more interesting just in terms of the riffs. This is a solid Meshuggah album. That's kind of what Meshuggah does to this point. And yeah, they executed it well once again.
I had this at number 6. I, first of all, agree with everybody. This is Meshuggah doing Meshuggah. I think this record should have followed ObZen instead of Koloss. I'm just going to say it. They sound a little bit more reinvigorated on this record, mostly with the songs all gelling, I think, the way they should. Clockworks, the drum pattern, I've seen the video. You've all seen the video.
What's a 13-year-old girl cover Clockworks? And she did an amazing job.
This record is heavy, too. It's like violently heavy, the Violent Sleeper Reason, but I think they focused more on just heft and bringing back the groove. Nostrum, the groove on that song is an absolute chugger. By the ton,
Yes.
it hits you like a ton of bricks. That song is heavier than shit. That show we saw him with the girls that wouldn't shut the fuck up, and then we saw him again in Columbus with Megadeth, and they did a great job, and no one was talking, and it was pretty neat.
Becky, this band's like loud and stuff. Oh, I don't like it. Let's go get more drinks.
Yeah.
I hate those two. Whatever your names are, fuck you.
Oh my god. And like Miller's saying, Meshuggah's loud. They were talking over that. And I, dude, no.
That's impressive.
Back to the record though. Tons of great groove, not as monotonous as I think Koloss was. Yeah, just a pretty heavy banger. It's one that I enjoy.
Meat and potatoes.
Yeah.
Yeah, meat and
Very
potatoes.
meat and potatoes.
But done as
very
Meshuggah
well.
would do it.
They're
Yeah,
throwing
very
the
well.
potatoes at you at an off-time rhythm so you don't know when
They're
to
slapping
dodge.
you with their potatoes.
Yeah.
In the face.
And their meat.
All right, in June of 2007, it was announced that Thornhill would be taking a kind of a leave of absence a little bit from the band, and they got Per Nilsson, like Shred Lord had mentioned before, from Scar Symmetry to fill in, doing the tours and whatnot. 2018 would get them their first American Grammy nod for Clockworks under the Best Metal Performance. It wouldn't be until March of 2021, though, that Thorndahl would return to the band and they would go into the recording studio to record their latest, Immutable, which was released in 2022. I know we were really excited, Necrotic and I, for reviewing this album. We were amped, and then this one for me is 6. It falls a little bit on the other edge of the lower tier. Because like we had mentioned in our review, it was It's kind of Meshuggah doing Meshuggah, and there wasn't too much that came out. Broken Cog, it doesn't hit as hard as most of their number one songs off the bat, but it's still a killer track. The Abysmal Eye is just ominous and imposing. Ligature Marks, I love that one. Ligature Marks is like insanely heavy. It's like the world is collapsing upon you type impending doom. What I love most about Meshuggah is that sense that they have of just like another world is coming and it is like Galactus is devouring your planet type of impending doom. And the Faultless too has kind of that same the world crumbling upon you type of doom feel, which I love. But overall, Immutable is kind of they're like in a stride, so to speak, and just kind of doing what they do best. There's just not enough to really latch onto or songs that I go, okay, this is definitely one that I'm going to listen to again. Maybe I just haven't listened to it enough, but it falls a little bit lower for me for those reasons.
My views on this one were a little bit more rough. This is my number 10. I was hyped that we finally got to go over a Meshuggah album, and this one was just very plain. Like, even by Meshuggah standards, like, this wasn't like the, like kind of meat and potatoes, I guess we described A Violent Sleep of Reason as. Like, all right, it's meat and potatoes Meshuggah, but it's still complex. It's still got a lot of, like, interesting layers, the music. There's, songs that really jump out. And this one, I didn't find a lot of songs that jump out. And in terms of the rhythms, like, this is...
mid-tempo drabble.
Yeah, and very straightforward. Like, in terms of polyrhythms on here, it's lost a layer of complexity. Like, it still has blunt force trauma riffs all over. Like, Broken Cog, I love that song. There's just something ominous and creepy, and I love Yen's, like, whispered, groaned vocals. Especially at the end, that whole refrain about noises and whispers. Like, it's really cool for the atmosphere. But the rest of the album, like, I just feel like are kind of like stock Meshuggah songs. And they feel like much more restrained than they have in comparison to like the last three albums, especially. They Move Below, I think, is kind of a standout as like a creepy, ominous instrumental. And, there's some other songs I liked. I Am That Thirst, I think it's pretty solid. But, like, if these songs were on any other Meshuggah album, like before it, they would be filler. They would honestly be filler, and I would probably skip most of them outside of, like, a couple on here. So I'm really hoping the next Meshuggah just, I don't know, it kind of has that fire again. Because it's only, like, flickers on here. It's just kind of a flat album for me.
Yeah, I had this at number 9. To me, it seems like a stripped-down version of Meshuggah. Like, I understand, at this point in the game, they've been at it a long time. So I don't want to say they ran out of ideas, but my take is simply this. Labels want albums. And so then they were like, well, here you go. Here's a Meshuggah album. Broken Cog is cool. The Abysmal Eye has some kind of cool grooves in it. The Faultless, more cool grooves, heavy and whatnot. But, like, the songs seem kind of stripped down. Most of the songs don't really go anywhere. And because of that, I think they tend to drag a little bit because they don't go anywhere. And like Nick said, there's just not a lot of memorable moments. There's nothing really that stands out. It's just like, oh, here's a Meshuggah song. It's definitely Meshuggah writing it because, Yen's vocals at this point in the game are unmistakable.
Oh, he sounds great.
And polyrhythmic grooves are fun and all, but even that, there's not so much of that even. This is like really straightforward. This is like meat and taters, except the meat's kind of dry and the taters are just bland and unseasoned.
This is the band that coined the term, like, math metal, too. And, like, this, band went from, like, complex algorithms and formulas to this, like, this is, like, multiplication tables for them.
And that's kind of how I felt about it. Even though I'm wearing the shirt, Nick bought me this shirt, actually, when he went and saw them on tour, because I said, hey, buy me a shirt. And so he bought me this shirt, and I was like, oh, cool. And that was before I heard the record. I just thought this record was kind of there, and much like everybody else has said, I would hope that in the future, maybe, even though, they've already stated, of course, Tomas has stated that he's going to slow down a little bit and he can't quite do the double kick as much, and I understand, dude. Once again, I still can't play Bleed. I get it. I'm just hoping that maybe in this stripped-down era that they're going into, that they at least remember where they came from and what they've done, and will still try to make it kind of entertaining, because I think this really fell flat, in my opinion.
It was number 8 for me, and yeah, like John said, it was just kind of there, right? Just kind of there. To me, every song kind of sounded like a cover of the song before it. There's not a lot of distinction between tracks. It's just kind of filler, man. Yeah, it's there. It's Meshuggah, but it's nothing that I'm ever going to crave or, be like, man, I gotta listen to that album, man. It's been a minute. I need to hear it. That's not going to happen. So, number 8.
All right, that brings us to the end of the ranking. How did we compare to you? Because normally me and Shredder are kind of in lines, and it was kind of all over.
It was really all over.
Yeah, it was jumbled, but we always like to see what you guys think as well. So put your rankings in the comments below, please, so that way we can kind of check it out and see, compare and contrast. We like to do that. It's fun for us.
Yep. And overall, like I said, this is one of my favorite bands. They will be my favorite band till the rest of, until I die. I will love this band and love everything they come out with. Like you said, hopefully in this new kind of era of it, they find something to, I don't know, just
latch on to and inspire them.
Yeah.
They can play slower and still be insanely heavy and complex. I'm down for that.
Much like Miller, I've always loved Meshuggah. I will always continue to love Meshuggah regardless of albums that may fall flat here and there. Like, they are definitely pretty influential on many a band still to this day, and they're always entertaining to listen to. Like I said, certain tracks I will never ever turn off.
I had a plan in terms of selecting a next batch of bands and kind of wanted to keep it, a little open and maybe, kind of just not go to our comfort zones. So what I did was fill Eddie's skull here full of slips of paper with different subgenres written on them. So this is going to be very random. And we'll tell you what, John, go ahead and reach in Eddie's skull and pull out a slip of paper. And then read it.
The first.
No.
It's going to be glam.
It's in there. Oh my goodness. What is it?
Melodic death metal.
Hey.
All right.
Hey.
All right.
All right, my turn. What are we going to get here? Let's see. It's unfolded up easy. Death metal.
Nice.
Well, there goes one I wanted. Fuck.
That's the one everyone wanted.
Black metal. Yes.
Oh.
All of your choices
This was a
are
terrible
oh my
idea.
God, yes.
All right.
Oh,
All
my
right.
God. I hope you get
British
glam
hip
metal.
hop.
Oh my God. I got glam metal.
Glam metal. No one's trading with you.
No one is trading with me. But you guys better not disappoint me with yours.
Yeah,
Now,
which brings us to our little rule that Nick created here.
we can negotiate a trade, but no
yeah,
one's trading
no one's
with
trading.
me. Unless anyone wants to trade here.
Nope.
Nope. I'm
think we're all
with
good.
melodic death metal. I
All
think
right.
you're probably good with
So
death
happy
metal.
with black metal.
Yeah, we all
Joe's
got what
happy
we
with black
wanted.
Metal. Yeah,
I did this to me.
Yep.
But I'm going to find some bands, and we're definitely going to go over them. So what we're going to do is essentially we're going to select 4 bands out of those genres, and we're going to have them up for vote. And yeah, you'll see those posts. What we need you guys to do is vote on them. And then by that, we will tell you our next batch of rankings.
Yeah, for me, it may be a challenge in finding some that we haven't ranked already.
Yeah.
Because some of those can't be in it.
Melodic
obviously.
death metal is going to be a great time. I already have at least one in mind.
Kind of wide open on this one.
Well, boys, Immortals on the menu tonight.
That means you got to vote for it, though. So yeah, that will wrap up this video. It has once again been a really fun ranking. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We are also on Patreon. If you'd like to help us out there, there's a link down below to thrallsmetal.com. Our Patreon link is there. It is also on our channel, the banner in the bottom right-hand corner. But if you're looking for Thralls Metal stuff, you have to go to thrallsmetal.com. We have t-shirts, both old and new. The old ones are discounted, provided we have your size. And we even have hats too. So if you're looking for any of that stuff, click the link down below.
And last but not least, tons of stuff coming from Thralls of Metal. Album reviews, more discography rankings, as you see. One of us got glam metal. I think that's pretty fucking...
You're going to have to listen to it
Yep.
too.
Well, whatever.
Awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, album rankings, is it metal, is it not metal, states of metal, Nick's never-ending collection updates, because what else is he going to do? Discussion panels, which we've decided to start doing, which seem to be going pretty fucking well. I think we're going to keep those coming your way.
We might introduce some guests.
Might introduce some guests. Who knows what's going to
Some
happen.
greatest hits segment.
Yep,
Yeah.
greatest hits segment. Yeah, tons of stuff coming. Really, though, the reason we do all this is for you guys. We appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you to all our family, our friends, our subscribers, everybody that interacts with the channel. We can't thank you enough how much it means to us that you've made Thralls of Metal part of your lives. We genuinely appreciate you, Nick.
Yeah, you guys absolutely rule. We're looking forward to overloading you with content, both new and old. And yeah, we will catch you later.
Mercy to the sky, cursed and damn this